At the company's couples meeting, she arrived with another man. I saw them both laughing, so relaxed, as if nothing we had experienced together had ever happened. That burned inside me in a way I can't even describe. I was holding a glass of wine, among friends, and suddenly my vision blurred, the noise in the room turned into a buzz. It was as if the world had spun too fast and thrown me against the wall. I approached. It couldn't be. It was her. My wife. The same woman who shared my bed, plans, bills, waking up early in the morning to take care of our son, birthdays, and the bills that got tight, and we laughed anyway. That woman, my wife, was there holding hands with another man in the same place where everyone knew she was married to me. And when I approached her and looked into her eyes, trying to find in them any shadow of the woman I loved, all I got was contempt. I asked, "Why are you doing this? Are you ruining everything we've built for status, is that it?" And she, with the coldness of someone who no longer saw me, said, "With him I'm finding what I didn't find in you." It was like being stabbed in the chest with no chance of defense. There, in front of dozens of surprised faces, she killed what was left of both of us. I didn't need anything else. I drove home in silence, driving without knowing where I was going, just wanting to get away from everything. When I got inside, the smell of her perfume was still in the air. Our photos on the shelf, our rings kept in the bathroom drawer, everything seemed to mock my pain. I spent the night awake. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I died inside, in silence, and that was much worse. The next morning, I sat down at the computer, wrote a divorce letter, and sent it straight to her house. No note, no explanation. She would know. I just needed to disappear from her life, but not like a defeated man. I was going to rebuild everything. For me. I started from scratch. I left the house where we lived, canceled bills, changed my phone number, deleted social media. I sold my car. I rented a small apartment, without luxuries, but with electricity. I started running at dawn, cooking for myself, reading books that had been piled up for years. I reconnected with old friends. I started laughing again. Little by little, I found myself again. I discovered that I was still there, behind the betrayed man, there was someone whole, just waiting for space to breathe. I met new people, I didn't look for love, but for the first time, I understood what it was to love myself. And it was when I least expected it that she reappeared. A few days after the letter, she started sending me messages. At first, they were cold and objective, as if she wanted to understand what had happened. Then came the missed calls, the deleted audios, the sidelong glances in the office hallways, the attempts to strike up a conversation with mutual friends. I ignored them all. Until one day, she showed up at the door of my building, unannounced, without makeup, with puffy eyes and a tense body. She looked at me as if she saw something sacred and said, "I made the worst mistake of my life." I could have screamed. I could have thrown in her face everything I had been through, everything she had destroyed. But I said nothing. I just watched as she broke down, saying that the man she was with was nothing like she had imagined, that passion had turned to contempt, that she missed the details of me, the coffee brewed just right, the dry towel, the comfortable silences. She said she even missed our arguments because she knew they were real, that there was love there. She asked for a second chance. She cried. And the cruelest thing was that part of me, for a second, wanted to hug her. But I had changed. And when I looked into her eyes, I realized, the pain no longer lived there. I was no longer the same man she had destroyed, and she was no longer the woman I had once loved. She said there was no more room for her. She said it calmly. With love for me. And I saw despair invade her face, as if only at that moment she had understood what she had done. She begged. She tried to kiss me. She grabbed me by the arms. She said she was willing to do anything. But time, that implacable judge, had already decreed the sentence. From then on, she tried everything. She sent gifts, made a scene in front of acquaintances, and arrived at work visibly shaken. She began to distance herself from her friends, from social media, and from the shine she once sought so much. Meanwhile, I moved on. And then the unlikely happened. I met someone. Someone who didn't come to heal, but to build. A serene woman, with an easy laugh and a clear gaze. She didn't ask me about the past. She looked at me as if I had never been broken. With her, the days had color again. Until, during a chance meeting, my ex saw me with this new woman. We were leaving a cafe, holding hands, when she passed us on the sidewalk. She froze. She didn't say anything. But her eyes said it all. It wasn't jealousy. It was something much worse, it was recognition. She finally realized that I was happy. Truly happy. Not out of revenge, not out of pride. Just, happy. And that devastated her. And then she began to wither. Not physically. But inside. Everything she had done, everything she had sought, the man she had exchanged me for, none of it remained. She had lost the most precious thing she had, herself. And now, seeing me reborn, she discovered that she had bet everything on a game she should never have played. Because some losses are final. And some choices, there is no going back. But what she doesn't know, and may never discover, is what I've kept hidden until today. A truth that would change everything, a final piece that closes the puzzle of our story and shows that the betrayal she thinks she committed was just the surface of what really destroyed our marriage. And the day that truth comes out, will be the day she understands the true price of the choices she made. And that's where it all begins. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support, under no circumstances, any kind of betrayal. The stories told are fictional, but inspired by painful realities, with one purpose only, to show how infidelity destroys lives, corrodes homes and scars souls forever. Prepare yourself. Because what you're going to hear now is shocking, intense and unforgettable. Fasten your seatbelts. The story is about to begin. Jonathan had always been a man of simple habits, a discreet, observant person, with a reserved tone of speech, but with a presence that was noticeable due to the calm he conveyed. He had the look of someone who had already faced life's storms without losing his footing. He had worked for over a decade as a financial analyst at a multinational company, where his precision and loyalty were admired even by his superiors. He was not the most charismatic person in the company, but he was the one everyone trusted. When something needed to be resolved honestly and competently, he was the one they turned to. Outside of the corporate environment, his routine was centered around the home, taking walks in the evening, reading the newspapers, and having Sunday lunches with his family. To his colleagues, Jonathan was the typical man who valued stability. But behind his tranquility, there was a man deeply in love with the woman he shared his life with, Helena. Helena was Jonathan's complementary opposite. Charismatic, elegant, with an easy smile and a striking presence, she carried with her an energy that lit up any room. Her career in luxury marketing put her in contact with influential people, renowned brands and sophisticated events. She knew how to behave naturally in any situation, from an informal meeting to a gala dinner. From a young age, she drew attention wherever she went, not only for her beauty, but for a quiet charm that seemed to envelop everyone around her. Her affable and intelligent manner made conversations pleasant and always light. And that was exactly what attracted Jonathan when they met in a postgraduate course years ago. While everyone was discussing numbers and metrics, they found themselves exchanging discreet glances, until their affinity became inevitable. The connection between the two was strong from the beginning, as if they complemented each other effortlessly. Their relationship began in an atmosphere of complicity and mutual admiration. Jonathan was enchanted by the lightness with which Helena dealt with life, her way of relating to the world, and her ability to transform any cold environment into something welcoming. Helena, in turn, saw in Jonathan the safe haven she had never had. He was balance, patience, and honesty in a corporate world where appearances often overshadowed essence. After 2 years of intense dating and full of discoveries, they decided to get married. They didn't have a grand ceremony, but it was a celebration full of meaning. The vows exchanged were neither memorized nor rehearsed. They were said with the trembling voice of someone who knew what they were promising: loyalty, respect, and love. Together, they set up a spacious apartment overlooking the city lights. Every corner had a touch of both of them. Helena took care of the decoration, the plants, and the soft aromas spread throughout the rooms. Jonathan took care of the maintenance, the finances, and the small maintenance that the routine required. It was as if every detail of their life together was built brick by brick, with a naturalness that made it clear how much they respected each other. On weekends, they would drink coffee on the balcony while reading the newspaper, and the evenings were marked by series, improvised candlelit dinners, and long conversations about the future. Helena was a restless woman, driven by challenges and new things. She loved being around people, participating in events and social gatherings. Her friendships were diverse, and her life was full of invitations and commitments. Jonathan, on the other hand, was selective. He preferred fewer friends, quieter environments, and a more predictable routine. But he never imposed his preferences on her. On the contrary, he encouraged her to soar, to grow, to achieve. He trusted her with the same conviction with which he trusted himself. He knew of his wife's charms, but he also knew her essence. And this trust was, for him, unshakable. The relationship remained solid during the first few years. They had their crises, like any couple. They argued about work, about time, about financial decisions, but they always found a balance. Jonathan never stopped taking care of Helena when she was weak. When she lost her father, he was the one who cancelled trips and commitments to be by her side during each stage of her mourning. When Jonathan fell ill for a few months, Helena took over the reins of the house and work, and still found the strength to stay by his side during the nights when he had a fever. In everyone's eyes, they were the ideal couple. The kind of couple that seemed to have stood the test of time. Helena loved sharing photos of the two of them on trips, in beautiful cafes, and spontaneous moments of everyday life on social media. Her followers always praised the chemistry and the couple's connection. Many were inspired by them. And Jonathan, although more reserved, got involved out of love for her. He posed for photos and participated in videos, even though it didn't come naturally to him. He did it because he wanted to see her smile. And Helena's smile was always the fuel for him to keep going. Over time, Helena began to gain prominence in the company. Her name began to be associated with important campaigns, her presence was requested at panels, award ceremonies, and business trips. Jonathan supported her, even when it meant going days without seeing her. He knew she deserved that recognition. And even though he felt her absence, he never verbalized his discomfort. On the contrary, he prepared surprises for when she returned, organized dinners at home, wrote notes and left small reminders around the house of how important she was to him. But something subtle began to change. Helena began to lose herself in her thoughts more often during dinner. Her cell phone began to ring more frequently and was turned face down. The laughter that had previously been spontaneous became spaced out. Jonathan noticed, but did not press the issue. He attributed it to fatigue, the pressure of work, the demands of his new position. He began to do more, to care more, to try to fill the gaps with silent gestures of love. He believed that everything was temporary, that Helena just needed some time, and that soon she would be the same as always. What Jonathan didn't know was that the changes he was observing were not just consequences of everyday life. But he had no idea about that. And maybe that was his mistake, trusting too much without asking, loving too much without measuring, giving everything of himself without realizing that sometimes the other person is no longer receiving. On the other hand, Helena felt divided. There was a restlessness inside her that not even she could explain. An emptiness that grew even on happy days. A feeling that there was something more out there, something she hadn't experienced yet, something that might make her feel again what she had felt at the beginning with Jonathan. The problem was that she didn't know exactly what she was looking for. It was a feeling that appeared without a name, an impulse that made her think about things she never imagined she would consider. And that disturbed her. Because, even though she was confused, she knew that Jonathan was the best man she had ever met. A man of integrity, loyalty, affection. And yet, something inside her wanted more. The house that had once been a refuge began to weigh heavily on them. The spacious apartment seemed smaller, coffees on the balcony were being replaced by unavoidable commitments, and improvised dinners gave way to nights in which each person lost themselves in their screens, speechless. The intimacy between the two remained, but it had become mechanical. A kiss before bed, a message in the middle of the day, but without the depth of before. Helena felt the distance growing, and no matter how much she tried to hide it, she knew that Jonathan noticed it too. Important dates continued to be celebrated. Jonathan never let birthdays or celebrations pass. He made sure to keep alive the memory of what they had built. But Helena no longer reacted in the same way. The gratitude still existed, but it was wrapped in a feeling of silent imprisonment. As if she was being loved too much by someone she no longer knew if she could love in the same way. And it was in this silent abyss between two worlds that once merged, that the story began to take shape towards the inevitable. No screams, no betrayals yet revealed, no intense fights. Just silences. Small silences that began to grow until they became walls. Helena walked away without knowing how to say that she was no longer there completely. And Jonathan was trying to rescue something that he believed still existed. But when two people love each other in different ways, time takes care of showing that not all love is enough to keep two hearts united. What they didn't know yet was that they were about to be swallowed by a silent storm. That their routine disguised as stability was on the verge of emotional collapse. And that when the truth came out, there would be no going back. Not because there was no love. But because love was silenced by choices that could not be undone. And what would come next would forever change each of their understandings of loyalty, regret, and redemption. Helena had gradually become an increasingly absent presence in her own home. It started with recurring delays, vague excuses about meetings that went on until late, networking events that couldn't be avoided, dinners with clients that somehow always coincided with the days when Jonathan was planning something special. He accepted it all calmly. He made a point of keeping the routine intact, of ensuring that the house continued to be a comfortable space, even when the heat between them began to dissipate. There were nights when Helena would simply enter the apartment, take off her shoes in the hallway, and lock herself in the bathroom for almost an hour. He would listen to the water running in the shower, then the hair dryer running, and when she finally came out, her hair still damp, she would avoid any closer contact and say she was exhausted. And he respected that. He didn't insist. He thought that maybe she was going through a moment of stress and that everything would return to normal soon. But there was a growing uneasiness inside him. Small signs that, when isolated, seemed harmless. The change of perfume, the new underwear he had never seen before, the slight smile on the corner of her mouth when she answered certain messages on her cell phone, the different sparkle in her eyes when she talked about a new project partner. A name that began to come up frequently in small talk, in reports about work. At first, it seemed normal. Partnerships emerged, affinities were formed, and Helena had always been socially active. But the way she referred to that name was different. There was an enthusiasm there that, however discreet, escaped. Jonathan observed everything silently, without questioning. Trust, until then, still seemed like a safe wall to him. One night, when Jonathan arrived home early from work, he found the house empty. Helena had said she would be in a meeting, but the absence of her purse and the silence of the apartment caused him a subtle anxiety. He looked around the room, noticed her perfume in the air, but did not feel her presence. He decided not to invade her privacy, but the uneasiness did not leave him. When he checked the couple's shared calendar, something they had used since the beginning of their marriage to organize themselves, he realized that there was a company event that night. A couple's get-together, something formal, where employees were encouraged to bring their partners to promote interaction and personal bonding. Helen had not mentioned it. And that, for Jonathan, was the first concrete sign that something was very wrong. Even without an invitation, she decided to go. She put on her most discreet suit, fixed her hair with the care of someone who still wanted to make a good impression, and headed to the venue. The room was lit with soft lights, the ambient music filled the space with an artificial elegance, and everyone's smile seemed rehearsed. She walked through the groups with firm steps, greeted acquaintances, forced smiles, but her eyes were only searching for one figure. And then she saw her. At the back of the room, near the bar, her body leaning slightly forward, laughing at something said by a man he had never seen before. She was beautiful, dressed in a dark tone that highlighted her striking features even more. Her hand rested subtly on his arm. It was a delicate gesture, almost imperceptible, but intimate. The kind of gesture Helena made when she felt completely at ease. Something that, Jonathan realized at that moment, he hadn't received in a long time. His stomach sank, as if the ground had given way beneath his feet. This wasn't a suspicion. It was a fact. And yet, he stood there, trying to rationalize, to seek logical explanations, to force his mind to believe that perhaps he was just a close colleague, someone who made her laugh without ulterior motives. But then he saw the two of them moving away discreetly, towards a side corridor, and everything inside him imploded. Without thinking, he crossed the room, driven by an impulse stronger than his own dignity. When he got closer, the two of them were already talking in lower tones, her body turned towards the other, and the looks they exchanged left no room for doubt. Jonathan stopped a few feet away, his eyes fixed on her. She saw him. And for a moment, she froze. The man beside her didn't notice right away, but the sudden silence made him turn around too. And there, in that brief moment, Helena wavered between two realities, the one she had built over the years with Jonathan, and the one she had begun to experience, out of impulse, or desire, or escape. Her expression wasn't one of guilt, or immediate regret. It was surprise, perhaps a slight fear, but above all, there was a certain defiance there. As if she had been caught on the edge between two worlds that couldn't coexist. Jonathan approached, keeping his gaze fixed on her. The words came out with effort, his voice firm but filled with contained pain. He asked her why she was doing this. He said that everything they had built could not be thrown away for vanity, for status, for a moment of pleasure. And her answer was like a slow-motion shot, "With him I am finding what I did not find in you." Those words pierced Jonathan with devastating force. It was not just the betrayal. It was the coldness. The simplicity with which she put an end to everything they had lived. That destroyed everything that still resisted inside him. There was no scandal, no shouting. He simply turned and left, leaving behind not only Helena, but the entire story he had once believed to be immutable. On the way home, the silence in the car was deafening. There was no anger, only a deep, dull pain that burned inside and left no room for tears. When he entered the apartment, everything seemed to still be permeated by her. The clothes in the closet, the notes forgotten in drawers, the books they had read together, the recipes stuck to the refrigerator door. Everything seemed to mock his naivety, his blind trust, the love he had given so completely. That morning, Jonathan didn't sleep. He sat at the table in the living room and wrote a letter. Brief, to the point, without insults or questions. Just the decision, divorce. He asked for the document to be delivered in person the next day. And then he left. I needed to breathe, get away, rethink everything. He walked for hours through the empty streets, reviewing scenes from the past that now seemed almost like fiction. It was hard to believe that someone who had once looked at him with so much love now saw him as an obstacle. Meanwhile, Helena received the letter late in the afternoon. Sitting in the living room of her apartment, she read and reread those words with trembling hands. She hadn't expected such a direct reaction. Maybe, deep down, she believed that Jonathan would forgive her, that that night would pass like any other mistake. But the coldness with which he withdrew from the scene, the painful serenity with which he said goodbye, that disturbed her. She felt her heart tighten, but she still couldn't name what it was, regret or wounded pride. And then, without her realizing it, life began to move on without her. Jonathan disappeared. He disappeared from all social networks, stopped going to the same places, didn't respond to messages, didn't return calls. Mutual friends couldn't tell where he was. He had, in fact, started over. And Helena, for the first time, felt the weight of an absence that she could no longer fill with excuses. She tried to move on, to keep up her routine, her commitments, her smiles. But everything seemed out of place. And the more time passed, the more she felt that something in her had been lost. It wasn't just Jonathan. It was who she was when she was with him. A part of herself that she had buried without realizing it. But what Helena still didn't know, what Jonathan hadn't revealed yet, not even to himself completely, was the secret that was hidden between the lines of that story. A detail that would completely change the meaning of everything. Because the betrayal, as painful as it was only the surface. There was something deeper, something that still remained in the dark, waiting for the right time to come to light. And when it did, none of the certainties they had about themselves would survive unscathed. The silence in the apartment contrasted with the chaos Helena felt inside. Time seemed to run at a different frequency since the day Jonathan left. He had disappeared with the same elegance he had always lived, without making a fuss, without giving explanations, without allowing himself to be played the victim. This corroded her more than any shouting or argument could have. Helena tried to continue with her routine, her professional commitments, her forced smiles at events, but something in her had collapsed. His absence was a constant, suffocating presence, and the regret that had previously seemed merely an inconvenience now took on proportions that she could no longer hide, not even from herself. She sought refuge in old places, tried to resume the habits they had shared, even went back to walking the same streets they had walked, as if, somehow, she could find him there. But she couldn't. Jonathan had rebuilt himself somewhere else, out of her reach. Until one day, when she was leaving a restaurant where she had been for a brief meeting, she saw him crossing the street. He was different. Lighter, firmer, like someone who had finally found peace after a silent war. Beside him, a woman walked smiling. She wasn't just pretty. She exuded serenity. The two looked at each other with a complicity that Helena recognized immediately, because it had once been hers. She felt her legs weaken and leaned against the wall of the building, her heart beating with an urgency she hadn't felt in a long time. That wasn't jealousy. It was the raw realization that she had lost something that could never be rebuilt. And it was that night, back in his empty apartment, that he decided to look for him. Not on impulse, but because he could no longer bear the weight of what he had done, and he needed, no matter how much it hurt, to confront what they had become. Jonathan agreed to meet her. They arranged to meet at a discreet cafe, far from familiar faces. When she arrived, he was already there. Sitting with his fingers intertwined on the table, looking outside as if contemplating something bigger than their conversation. When he saw her, he simply nodded. She sat down across from him. The air between them was thick, as if any word could shatter what was left of the floor. She began by saying that she didn't expect him to forgive her, that it might be too late, but that she needed to tell him that what she had done was an immeasurable mistake. She said that she was looking for something outside of herself, something she thought was lost, and that she had been foolish to think she could find it in the arms of another person. That she had confused desire with absence, attention with passion, and destroyed it all in a blind impulse. Jonathan listened in silence. His eyes showed no anger. There was an abyss of maturity there, something she had no longer reached. When she finished, she asked if he was at least thinking about forgiving her, if only so she could move on in peace. Jonathan took a deep breath and leaned forward slightly. He said there was no more anger. That time had taught him that some pains need to be felt until the end so they can be left behind. He said there was no room for hatred, only for the certainty that this story was over. Helena lowered her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on emerging. That was when he said, with the same calm he used to resolve crises at work, that there was something she didn't know. Something he kept hidden out of respect for everything they had been through, but now, looking into her eyes and seeing that, for the first time, she was truly vulnerable, he felt he needed to say it. Helena looked at him, surprised. Jonathan then told her that, months before the breakup, she had discovered that she could not have children. The diagnosis had been a shock. Not because of the fact itself, but because of the way it would change the plans they had always shared. For years, they had talked about having a family, in a light, unpressured way, but it was something that was part of their imagination. He put off telling her, not because he was afraid of losing her, but because he was still trying to accept it. He did not want to seem weak, much less carry the weight of being responsible for this emptiness. He preferred to wait for the right moment. But that moment never came. And so she walked away. Without knowing the diagnosis, without knowing the silent pain he carried. And that was when he understood, she was not walking away because of a lack of love, but because she felt that something had changed and she did not know what. And he, out of pride, chose silence. Helena felt as if the world had collapsed. Her mouth went dry, her heart raced. She tried to put the words together, but all she could manage was a shaky whisper, asking why he never told her. Jonathan smiled at her sideways. He said that love sometimes silences her out of protection. That he chose to suffer alone because he believed that way the pain would not reach her. But he realized, too late, that silence also hurts. That, by hiding his truth, he ended up making room for distance. She, realizing, put her hands over her lips, as if to stop herself from screaming. She cried. She cried not because of the betrayal she had committed, but because she realized how much she had failed him. Not because of the mistake, but because she had not realized that he also carried a cross. She said through her tears that she would have stayed. That she would have understood. That none of this mattered if they had faced it together. And he replied calmly that he knew that. But that love does not survive on intention alone. That there are losses that transform, and that what they were could never be rebuilt on the rubble of what they hid from each other. She said that the new relationship he was living now was not a trophy or an escape, but the reflection of the man who had rebuilt himself after being torn apart. She said that he was happy. For the first time, happy in a serene way. And that he sincerely hoped that she would also find peace. Helena stood there, before him, not knowing how to breathe. It was the first time she had seen herself so naked, not in clothes, but in soul. Everything she had done, every impulse, all her vanity, all her pride, now seemed like dust compared to the truth he had kept hidden. His pain had always been there. And she, blinded by her own mistakes, did not see it. She did not lose him when she betrayed him. She lost him much earlier, when she chose not to see that he also needed to be taken care of. Jonathan stood up, paid the bill discreetly, and said goodbye with a calm, weightless look, as if he had already ended that cycle a long time ago. He said he hoped that one day she would understand the value of silence, but also the importance of breaking it while there was still time. She remained seated, motionless, as she watched him leave through the glass door, his silhouette disappearing into the late afternoon lights. And there, in that moment, she knew that she would never forgive herself. Because now, more than ever, she understood what she had done. And that truth weighed more than any punishment. Helena remained seated in that chair for long minutes after Jonathan left. The waiter approached her twice, discreetly, offering her the bill that had already been paid. She didn't answer. She looked at the empty table, as if the version of her that existed before that conversation was still sitting there. The silence was no longer silence, it was a reverberation of guilt that now had a name, a face, and weight. When she finally stood up, her legs wavered. She walked to the exit as if crossing a field of ruins. And that was all that was left of her, rubble. The woman who had once been admired, desired, and self-assured, was now just a shadow carrying memories that would never make sense in the same way again. She didn't know where to go, so she walked aimlessly, crossing streets, staring at storefronts that reflected her own emptiness. She felt like her soul had moved away from her body and watched from the outside as she wandered through a city she no longer recognized. In the days that followed, Helena tried to fill the void with distractions. Meetings, trips, rushed coffees, long connections with colleagues, events that seemed to be just filling a script written by someone who no longer knew her. But the feeling of displacement persisted. Everything had lost its color. It was as if the world was functioning on a frequency she could no longer reach. The compliments at work no longer had any value, the new proposals seemed empty, and the looks from other men, which had previously fed her vanity, now made her feel embarrassed. Jonathan had shown her something she never expected to see, the reflection of the woman she had become. And that reflection frightened her. Because it wasn't just about having lost him. It was about having lost herself. One night, while she was going through old folders stored in the back of her closet, she found a box. Inside were photos, letters, movie tickets, travel tickets, and even a napkin with Jonathan's handwriting saying, "You are the best part of me." It broke her. She sat on the floor, surrounded by memories that silently screamed at her for everything she had destroyed. She picked up one of the letters, read it aloud, and cried. She cried like she hadn't cried in a long time. Without control, without restraint, as if each tear washed away a little of the lies she had told herself that she could go on as if nothing had happened. On the other side of the city, Jonathan was beginning to build a new phase of his life. The woman he was involved with was not part of a revenge, nor was she a consolation. She was someone who saw him without a past, who did not demand explanations. They both shared a different lightness, not based on the history they carried, but on the presence they offered each other. He had learned to laugh again. To feel pleasure in small things, like cooking together or watching a movie lying on the couch while she slept with her head on his chest. He had rediscovered the joy of peace. And that was more valuable than any revenge. Jonathan no longer sought answers. He did not feed ghosts. He had made peace with his own silence. He knew that the pain he had faced did not define him, but shaped him. And that was enough. But the story wasn't over yet. One late afternoon, Helena decided she needed to say goodbye to the house they had lived in together. The apartment was still in their names, and she had left behind many things she had avoided facing. He asked for the keys through a mutual intermediary, and Jonathan authorized it without objection. When she entered the place, she felt the weight of emptiness. Each wall seemed to hold an echo. The sound of cutlery, his footsteps in the hallway, the smell of coffee at dawn. He walked through the room slowly, as if he were stepping on sacred ground. In the bedroom, the closet was empty. Only the bed remained in the center, with the bedspread folded down to the millimeter. She sat on the edge, closed her eyes, and for the first time, allowed herself to say out loud what she had avoided for all those months, "I destroyed the only true love I had." And she stayed there for hours, lying down, hugging herself, as if Jonathan's embrace was still imprinted on the sheets. The following week, she decided to write a letter. A long, raw, sincere letter. Not to ask for back what she had lost, but to deliver what she had never had the courage to, a complete confession of regret. She said she did not expect an answer, did not expect a reunion, did not expect redemption. But she needed to say everything. That she felt empty. That the love he gave her was the greatest gift she had ever received. That understanding his diagnosis made her realize how blind she had been by her own faults. That the betrayal was not only physical, but emotional, moral, spiritual. That she had betrayed their history, the silent vows, the smiles shared in silence on Sunday nights. She said she dreamed of seeing him happy, even if it broke her heart. And that she wished, from the bottom of her soul, that the woman by his side would know how to value him as she did not. Jonathan read the letter on a rainy morning. He was with his new partner, who was sleeping next to him. He read each line calmly. There was no anger, no euphoria. Just a bittersweet feeling of closure. He put the letter away without replying. Not because he had nothing to say, but because everything had already been said. And sometimes, the greatest act of love one can offer is the silence of acceptance. He knew he had been broken, rebuilt, and now he was a different person. That love was over. But its essence had grown stronger. Months later, the two crossed paths again. It was at a charity event hosted by a former colleague they had in common. The room was discreet, the atmosphere sophisticated. When their eyes met, Helena felt a twinge in her chest. Jonathan was calmer than ever. Beside him, the new woman smiled with a gentleness that was not intimidating, but showed how well he was doing. He nodded to her. She responded with a restrained smile. And in that brief moment, Helena understood. There was no longer room for her there. Their story had been buried with dignity. And Jonathan's new chapter had no blank pages for old promises. After leaving the event, Helena walked alone to her car. She started the engine and stood there for a few minutes, watching the movement on the street. She knew that from then on, she would have to rebuild herself. Not with another man, not with a hastily forged new version of herself, but with the courage to face what she had destroyed. She knew that the guilt would not disappear, but she hoped that in time, it would transform into learning. She looked in the rearview mirror and, for the first time in months, saw her own eyes without running away. There was no shine, but there was truth. And that, at that moment, was the first step towards something that perhaps one day she could call peace. In the days that followed their silent reunion at the charity event, Jonathan did not allow himself to dwell on memories of the past. It was as if that last exchange of glances had sealed, definitively and without words, everything that remained between him and Helena. He understood that it was not possible to erase everything they had lived, nor did he want to. But there was no more room within him to relive or reimagine what could have been. The new phase of his life continued with firm steps, not as an escape from pain, but as the natural continuation of someone who made his own reconstruction a choice and not a consequence. Little by little, the scars became part of a stronger identity, and the serenity that now enveloped him was not only the absence of pain, but the presence of awareness. He did not wish Helena ill, nor did he dwell on what he had suffered. But the love he had felt, pure and loyal, was now part of a chapter that had closed with dignity and maturity. Meanwhile, Helena was facing an increasingly deep dilemma. It was no longer about the pain of having lost Jonathan, nor the guilt of having betrayed her. What was eating her up now was the internal confrontation with the woman she had become. She asked herself daily how she could have let herself be carried away by something so shallow and believed, even for a moment, that it would complete her. He realized that what he was looking for in the arms of another man was never desire, but escape. Escape from routine, from emotional responsibility, from the fear of facing the vulnerability of the man who had always been by her side. It was easier to fantasize that there was something missing in him than to admit that the emptiness was inside her. Now, alone, this truth screamed every day, in every corner of the house, in every place that had previously been a stage for laughter and intimacy. And no matter how much she tried to move on, each attempt was sabotaged by the memory of a love that she herself chose to destroy. Mutual friends had also become divided over time. Some distanced themselves from Helena because they didn't know how to deal with the tension between her and Jonathan, others out of silent disappointment. As for him, their respect only grew. Many admired him for how he handled everything, without exposure, without retaliation, without self-pity. Only with dignity. Jonathan didn't try to speak ill of her, he didn't try to demoralize her in any social circle. His silence was the greatest response. And this attitude, more than any speech, was what most destabilized Helena as the months went by. The lack of direct confrontation forced her to confront her own conscience, without distractions, without excuses to transfer responsibility. Lonely nights became more frequent, not for lack of invitations or opportunities, but because of an almost involuntary decision not to get involved with anyone. Every time she tried to start something new, she felt like she was forcing a replacement that would never be fair. Not because Jonathan was irreplaceable, but because she had not yet forgiven herself. And this weight contaminated any attempt to reconnect with the world around her. The eyes that used to shine at events and meetings now avoided mirrors, as if any reflection would reveal the woman she no longer wanted to be. She sought professional help, began attending therapy sessions in silence, without telling anyone. She needed to understand what was behind the choices she made, she needed to understand why she had thrown everything away even though she had everything. The sessions were not easy. They demanded a type of courage from her that she had not needed until then, the courage to look inside herself without filters, without emotional makeup, without the shield of vanity. It was during one of these sessions that she came up with the idea of writing a letter, not to Jonathan, but to herself. A letter of confession and liberation. And so it was that, on a cold morning, she sat down at the table, took a blank sheet of paper and wrote with a trembling hand everything she felt, everything she did, everything she regretted. She wrote about the happy days, about the signs she ignored, about the vanity that blinded her, about the fear of not being enough and the illusion that being desired by another man would make her feel alive. She also wrote about the pain she felt when she realized that Jonathan had moved on without her, not as someone who had forgotten her, but as someone who understood her value despite her. When she finished, she did not read what she had written. She folded the letter, put it in a box with other memories and put it in the back of the closet. It was not time to forget, but to respect the pain as part of the process. On the other side, Jonathan felt that the cycle was closing in an increasingly natural way. The new relationship he was living was blossoming calmly, without rushing, without comparisons, but with depth. He had learned to communicate more clearly, to express his feelings before they became swallowed silences. The woman who now walked by his side did not compete with Helena's shadow. She knew him for who he was now, and not for who he had been. There was a lightness in him that only time teaches. And this made him see life with different eyes. He no longer carried guilt or resentment, only memories of a time that served to forge a more complete man. He still loved the same music, the same books, still appreciated the silence of a quiet afternoon, but now with a new outlook. And that difference was everything. One weekend, while organizing old boxes to donate, he found a photo frame with a picture from the times when he and Helena still shared easy laughter. He stared at that image for a few seconds. There was no pain. Just a quiet longing of someone who knows that it was real, but that it no longer represents him. He put the photo frame aside, along with other things that would no longer accompany him. That was not erasing history. It was respecting the time of each memory. It was understanding that growing up also means choosing what to carry and what to leave behind. Helena, in turn, started a social project aimed at women in the process of starting over. She used her experience as fuel to help others reconnect with their essence before they made mistakes like hers. She didn't talk about Jonathan directly, but her eyes revealed that there was something there that had shaped her deeply. The initiative wasn't a call for public redemption, but a sincere effort to reframe her pain into something useful. As she saw other women finding strength in their own ruins, she felt that perhaps she was, little by little, following the same path. At one point, she was invited to give a talk about emotional reconstruction. The audience was packed, made up of women of different ages, stories, and wounds. When she went on stage, she felt a chill down her spine. It wasn't fear of speaking, it was the responsibility of touching those present with honesty. She began by saying that the greatest betrayal she had committed in her life was not against another person, but against herself. And that only after losing everything did she understand what she was truly worth. Her words struck a chord. When she finished, she received a standing ovation. And there, for a moment, she felt that something inside her was finally beginning to find a way to forgive. Life went on, and each of them, in their own way, wrote new lines without erasing the previous ones. Jonathan with his new love, Helena with her silent search for meaning. And even if their paths never crossed again, there was something deeper between them than any physical reunion, the certainty that some stories, no matter how they end, leave marks that teach us how to live better from now on. Now, there was only one last piece left to fit together, one last gesture, one last page. The silent conclusion of a story marked not by its ending, but by how much it taught those who had the courage to feel to the limit. The following months marked a silent and definitive transformation. Helena began to reap the fruits of her new choices, although she still lived in the shadows of what she once was. With each passing week, her social project grew, attracting more women, more stories, more lives seeking a second chance to rise from the depths. Amidst the pain of others, she began to recognize her own strength, but more than that, she faced the uncomfortable truth every day that the empathy she now offered to others was exactly what she had once denied to those who deserved it most. The scenario changed, not only physically, with the project's small headquarters expanding, but inside her, where the internal corridors previously filled with guilt began to be reformulated by new purposes. Even so, when she went to bed every night, Jonathan's name was not an open wound, but an absence that occupied a serene space, a presence that would not return, but that no longer caused emotional bleeding. One afternoon, after an intense conversation with a group of women undergoing emotional rehabilitation, one of them, a younger woman, asked Helena how it was possible to survive a wrong choice that had destroyed something so true. The room fell silent. Helena took a deep breath, looked the girl in the eye, and replied that surviving was a process, but that living again required a deeper courage, that of accepting that the forgiveness that hurts the most is the one we need to give ourselves. As she finished speaking, she realized that her own words were echoing within her. The strength she offered to others was not faked, but there was still a constant effort within her to not lose herself again. That same week, an unexpected invitation came her way. A cultural institute proposed a partnership to transform her work into a larger, nationwide program. The recognition touched her, but what left her breathless was the name of the project director, Jonathan's new partner. The woman who, silently and without rivalry, had taken over a place that had previously been hers, now appeared as a possibility of reconnecting with the new reality that Helena was still hesitant to face head-on. For a moment, she considered refusing. But something in her, perhaps a mature and silent part that had grown with pain, pushed her to accept the invitation. Not out of defiance, nor out of pride, but because perhaps this would be the last step to seal her cycle of reconstruction. On the day of the meeting, Helena arrived punctually. The environment was different from anything she was used to, spacious, modern, dynamic. The director welcomed her warmly. There was no tension or competition. Just two mature women, each with their own pains and learnings, face to face. During the meeting, they talked about projects, goals, and experiences. But at a certain point, while they were adjusting the details of the schedule, the director paused briefly, looked Helena in the eye, and said, bluntly, that she knew who she was. She said that Jonathan had never spoken ill of her, had never played the victim, but that his silence had taught her more about character than any speech. Helena felt her stomach turn. But the woman in front of her was not speaking judgmentally. She was speaking with empathy. She said that if they were there at that moment, it was because they had both been through the fire and survived. And that, perhaps, they did not need to be enemies of their own stories in order to move forward. The words touched Helena like a bomb. For the first time, she felt that she didn't need to hide or defend what was already indefensible. After the meeting, she exchanged a sincere look with the woman and shook her hand firmly. There was no forgiveness to be asked for, nor granted. Only the realization that life sometimes rebuilds unexpected bridges to show that the past, when accepted, can no longer be a burden. On the other side of the city, Jonathan was living peaceful days, but something new was emerging in his life, the imminence of fatherhood. Although the infertility diagnosis was still part of his history, he and his partner had begun the adoption process. The decision was not sudden, but rather matured from the love they shared and the common desire to offer someone the chance to have a real home. During the interviews and evaluations, Jonathan revisited many aspects of his past. When asked about his previous love life, he did not shy away. He spoke respectfully, without scandalous details, and highlighted what he had learned. He said that his pain was the starting point for a transformation that led him to this point, and that, more than ever, he felt ready to offer love to someone who was not to blame for anything, but who needed everything. A few weeks later, they received the connection they had been waiting for, a 6-year-old girl named Luna was up for adoption. When Jonathan met her, his eyes lit up in a way they hadn't in a long time. She wasn't a replacement, she wasn't a patchwork. She was something new, clean, full of possibilities. The connection was immediate. Luna, with her shy and intelligent ways, found in him a place that seemed to have always been hers. Within a few months, the three of them were forming a new family. The once silent house came alive, and the nights were filled with stories, laughter, and little messes that made it all worthwhile. Meanwhile, Helena, now involved in a project with national impact, saw her story become a reference in starting over. She was invited to give interviews, write articles, and participate in documentaries. She never mentioned names, but she made it clear that she had gone through the deepest pain a soul could bear, the pain of realizing that she had distanced herself from herself. And that, even so, it was possible to start over. In one of these interviews, when asked if she had found love again, she responded with a slight smile that, sometimes, the greatest love we can find is the one we have for ourselves. And that, when it is true, the rest falls into place over time. One day, as she was passing by a park near where she lived, she saw Jonathan from afar. He was holding a child's backpack and calling Luna to come down the slide. The little girl ran to him, laughing, and jumped into his arms. Helena watched for a few seconds, unseen. There was a happiness there that no longer needed to be hers to be real. And for the first time, she felt no pain or envy. Only a silent tenderness for having loved a man capable of rebuilding his own world without hate. She walked back home with firm steps. Life had moved on, and so had she. Later, sitting at the table, she wrote another letter. Not to send, nor to keep. Just to say what no longer needed to be said out loud, that her pain was no greater than anyone else's, that her story was not a burden but a lesson, and that Jonathan, even from a distance, would forever be the noblest memory she would have of what it is to love someone with all her soul. She folded the paper and burned it slowly, letting the smoke take with it the last trace of a past that could now finally rest. Time did not heal everything, but it offered choices. And, in that moment, she chose peace. Time followed its course without asking permission, and the years that passed polished each of those involved as the sea does with stone, with silent insistence and irreversible power. Jonathan became an even more admired man, not only for the professional success he continued to cultivate, but for who he became outside of the social stage. His home was now a haven of peace, where joy manifested itself in the small rituals of daily life with Luna, who grew up full of curiosity, sensitivity, and intelligence, shaped by the stability that he and his partner had built with such dedication. Her presence had transformed Jonathan completely. He learned to be a father, not out of obligation, but out of vocation. He dedicated himself with a quiet intensity, the kind that doesn't need to be announced because it is felt in every gesture, in every bedtime story, in every piece of advice given patiently when the first frustrations at school appeared. His loving relationship remained solid, built with the clarity of someone who knew what it was to lose and never wanted to take love for granted. There were no fantasies or idealizations, but a true complicity, sustained by the daily choice to remain. Helena, in turn, reached the height of her social influence with the institute she founded, becoming a prominent figure in the fight for emotional and social reconstruction. Her story began to be told in events, podcasts, books and programs. She was invited to speak about overcoming, about starting over, about the courage to recognize mistakes and transform them into fuel for a new life. But despite her public success, there was a private stillness that only she knew. She lived alone, by choice, in a new, minimalist apartment, with large windows from which she could see the sunset, as if she needed to remind herself daily that there was still beauty after the fall. She never got seriously involved with anyone again. A few men passed by, discreetly, briefly, without a story. Not for lack of opportunities, but because there was a place inside her that did not want to be occupied again, not out of fear, but out of respect for the memory of the love she lost. She had learned, in the most painful way, that absence is a constant reminder of the value of presence. And over time, she learned to live with this absence without letting it define her. One ordinary afternoon, while returning from a recording session, Helena stopped in front of a school to watch a group of children playing. Her eyes soon recognized the figure of Luna running across the court, smiling carefreely. Next to the gate, Jonathan waited patiently, with his backpack slung over one shoulder and his arms crossed in a relaxed manner. They didn't see her. Helena didn't move. She just watched. And there, in that moment, a tear escaped, not of pain, but of a new feeling, perhaps the most liberating she had ever felt: acceptance. She understood that the man who now watched his adopted daughter play with a sparkle in his eyes no longer belonged to her, and that didn't tear her apart inside. On the contrary, it made her breathe more easily. Because despite what she had lost, she had managed to transform herself into a woman who could finally look at herself without looking away. She returned home in silence, feeling that that moment had been a wordless but necessary farewell. That same night, Jonathan received news that made him rethink the value of life. Luna had written an essay at school about "the hero of my life," and the entire text was dedicated to him. It said that her father was born of love and not blood, and that she wanted to grow up to give people the same peace that he gave her. When he finished reading, he closed his eyes, overcome with emotion, and felt that everything, every pain, every loss, every moment of silence, had served a greater purpose. Deep down, he knew that the story with Helena had shaped the best version of himself. And that didn't make him ashamed. On the contrary. He honored every tear as part of a journey that had led him to this moment. Months later, at an award ceremony where Helena's institute was to be honored, fate decided to cross their paths for the last time. Jonathan was invited to present the award, on behalf of the social support network of which he was now a member as an advisor. The auditorium was packed, the ceremony impeccable. When she took the stage, the two looked at each other. And in that moment, without words, the past bowed before maturity. He presented the trophy with a serene smile, and she accepted it with a subtle nod. The audience gave a standing ovation. And there, in front of so many people, two worlds that had once collided said goodbye peacefully, without drama, without resentment, only with the certainty that they had survived the storm and, in different ways, prospered. After that event, they never saw each other again. But each of them moved on with a lighter soul. Helena continued her work with even more passion, dedicating herself to transforming lives while continuing to rebuild her own. Jonathan immersed himself in fatherhood and the quiet life he had chosen, focused on raising Luna with the values that silence itself had once taught him. The love he offered was now full, mature and constant, and there was no longer any trace of the old pain, only gratitude. Helena and Jonathan's story was not one of romantic reconciliation, but of personal redemption. He moved on with another woman, with another purpose, another peace. She moved on with herself, with the mission of being better for others, since she could not be enough for the one she loved most. Neither of them forgot what they went through, but both learned to no longer live in the shadow of it. And that is the beauty of the ending. Not every love story needs to end together to be unforgettable. Sometimes, the true victory is moving forward with dignity, even after destruction. If you've made it this far, tell us what you think about this story. We'd love to hear your opinion. Leave a like, activate the bell and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more stories like this. And let this be a reflection: betrayal does not only destroy relationships, it destroys trust, disfigures character, silences love and breaks the deepest bonds that two people can build. It leaves scars that, even when healed, never return to what they were. And that is why this channel does not support any type of betrayal. Thank you for listening until the end. Until the next story.